Okay, Houdini student log 2. So since last time I've learned a lot. I learned, for example, about the poly bevel tool. I already knew how beveling was, but this sort of does it for you. It's really nice. You could always define any sort of edges you wanted it to do it specifically to, but here it sort of bevels everything. Helps it so when you subdivide, things look a lot better. It saves you time on fencing, but it does ruin your geometry a little bit, so you want to be careful with it. However, it's great for static meshes, for example, and then you can use the the divide tool to assure you have proper geometry. So you can put the maximum 4 edges to try to have quads or triangles at the very least. And you can use groups to have selections saved as data. And if you ever wanted to use it in another node, the data, you could use it. But the next thing I learned was, here's just a simple box, right? If I use the add, what's the name? Add SOP. If I use the add SOP node, there's an option called delete geometry but keep the points. And this is great because it just gives you points from a geometry. So you could use anything for this. It doesn't have to be a box. And then you can randomize attributes. And attributes are basically pieces of information held within each component of a geometry. So like in points and vertices or primitives / faces. They each contain different informations. And at this point, for example, it shows you each different point. Let me go back to scene viewer. So we can put this up. See, each of them are numbered, and that's what this is here. And each of these have these individual attributes in the columns. But one of the ones they have is p scale, which is just its scale, its size. And what this attribute randomizer does is you select a p scale. It randomizes things. It basically randomizes the number from a point from 0 to 1. But if you go here to distribution, you can change the min and max value. In this case, this is a float, so you're only doing the first field. But if you're using a vector for like a location, you would be using 3 fields, etc., right? So using that, and also randomizing the color, you sort of get this result. If I turn that off, and this one, okay, you get sort of this result, these randomized balls all over the place, right? So yeah, these randomize this using the attributes, and using the copy stamp, you can make several copies of things, as well as using these variables here. Right, so I have a variable here. If I go to right click there, expressions, edit expression, if it has a green tab, it usually means it has an expression. What this expression is doing is it's getting a random point, and it is setting a new min max from 0 to 360. Right? So using this information, you're sort of generating a random we are using this to generate a random rotation, which I then use up here, down here. So as you can see here, the stamp copy, whatever. Basically, I'm grabbing the variable here, and I'm the variable from downstream, and I'm putting it as a random rotation here, and that's creating these balls that are randomly rotated all over the place, and they're placed in, and they're also generated with a random scale, and added to the points here, right? So the reason they might look like they're going outside is because they're just bigger. The next thing I do is I generate a volume using them. These are using a voxel grid to generate it. So if I were to go here again and reduce the voxel size, it would make it do a smaller grid, which means higher detail. But then what I'm doing here is I'm smoothing it out to make it look a little less jagged. And then you can actually convert back. So here I'm converting the polygon to a volume, and you sort of lose the information, right? No longer have primitives, vertices. But then down here I convert it back. As you can see, it does have a lot of verts, but there's ways to reduce, like poly reduce, to reduce the number of verts it has. And this converts it back to a polygon with relatively good amounts of quads and triangles. But the idea of this is it would be impossible to hand create a complicated mesh like this. So being able to create these complicated forms, rather organic-like actually, using this technique is really helpful. So far, that's a good amount of what I learned. I'll be updating more. But yeah, log number 2. Jose out.